The sun was setting over Vienna, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink as Irina Volkov stepped out of her taxi. She took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air and looked up at the gleaming glass building where the Global Technology Summit was being held. For 30 years, Irina had performed in the world's most prestigious concert halls, her fingers dancing across piano keys with a skill few could match. But this was different. This wasn't a music hall, it was a tech conference. Dr. Volkov, welcome. A young woman with bright eyes and a tablet in her hand hurried down the steps to greet her. I'm May, one of the event coordinators. We're so honored you agreed to participate in our demonstration tomorrow. Irina smiled warmly, though inside she felt a twist of nervousness. Why had she said yes to this strange invitation? Playing piano at a tech conference seemed odd, but her agent had insisted it would help reach younger audiences. The pleasure is mine, Irina replied, following May into the building, though I must admit I'm still not entirely sure what I'm supposed to do here. May laughed lightly as they walked through the lobby filled with displays showcasing cutting-edge inventions. Don't worry, your part is simple. You'll play a piece on our stage and then we have a little surprise planned. But first, the team wanted to give you a tour of some of our exhibits. They passed through crowds of people in business attire, examining holographic displays and strange devices Irina couldn't begin to understand. The pianist felt out of place in her simple black dress and comfortable shoes, a visitor from another world where art still reigned over algorithms. This way, please. May guided her toward a less crowded area where a small group of people stood around something Irina couldn't quite see. As they approached, the group parted, revealing what, or rather who, they had been observing. Irina stopped in her tracks. Standing in the center of the group was what looked like a person, but clearly wasn't. Its body was mostly white plastic with metal joints, standing about 5 feet tall with a face that seemed almost human but not quite, like a sculpture that captured the essence of humanity without trying to be a perfect copy. Dr. Volkov, this is Area 7, said a tall man with salt and pepper hair and glasses, stepping forward with his hand extended. And I'm Thomas Chen, head of the robotics division at Quantum Systems. Irina shook his hand, her eyes still fixed on the robot. Area 7? What does that stand for? Adaptive Responsive Intelligence Assistant, 7th generation, Thomas explained with obvious pride. Though we've all just taken to calling her Arya? Her? Irina raised an eyebrow. Thomas shrugged. It's just easier than saying it all the time. Old habit from the lab. Irina stepped closer to the robot, studying its features. Its eyes were cameras, obviously, but designed to look like eyes with irises that adjusted their size just like human pupils. The face could move too, she realized, as the robot smiled at her. A simple expression, but surprisingly effective. Hello, Dr. Volkov, said the robot in a voice that was pleasantly neutral, neither too mechanical nor trying too hard to sound human. It is an honor to meet a musician of your caliber. Irina couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. The voice was coming from the robot itself, not speakers hidden elsewhere. Thank you, she replied automatically, then turned to Thomas. It knows who I am? Arya is connected to our database and can access public information, Thomas explained. She's designed to learn from interactions and adapt her behavior accordingly. And what exactly will Arya be doing during my performance tomorrow? Irina asked, a hint of concern in her voice. Nothing at all during your performance, Thomas assured her. You'll play just as you would in any concert. Afterward, we'd like to demonstrate some of Arya's learning capabilities, if that's all right with you. Irina nodded slowly, not entirely convinced. She'd heard horror stories from fellow artists about technology being used to copy their work or replace human creativity with algorithms, and what capabilities would those be? A younger man stepped forward from the group, thin with dark hair pulled back in a short ponytail and round glasses that gave him an owlish appearance. Arya's primary function is adaptive learning, he explained. I'm Ben Watanabe, by the way, one of Arya's programmers. Ben continued. Most machines learn through massive amounts of data, but Arya is different. She observes physical movements and can understand patterns in real time. We've been teaching her various human activities, everything from cooking to basic sports. But not piano playing? Irina guessed. Not yet, Ben confirmed with a smile. That's where you come in. We thought it would be fascinating to see how she responds to such a complex physical and artistic skill. Irina crossed her arms. So what, you want her to watch me play and then try to play herself? Thomas and Ben exchanged glances. Well, yes, Thomas admitted, though we don't expect anything impressive. It's more about demonstrating the learning process. I see, Irina said, feeling slightly more at ease. If the robot couldn't actually play piano yet, there was little risk of it somehow copying her unique style, the result of decades of training and personal artistic development. Would you like to see the piano you'll be using tomorrow? May asked, gently steering the conversation forward. Irina nodded, glad for the change of topic. Yes, I'd like that very much. They moved to another area where a beautiful grand piano stood on a small stage. Irina immediately walked toward it, running her fingers lightly over the polished black surface. This, at least, was familiar territory, may I? She asked, gesturing to the bench. Of course, Thomas said. Please make yourself comfortable. Irina sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. She closed her eyes for a moment, shutting out the strange surroundings, then began to play. Just a simple scale at first, testing the action of the keys and the resonance of the strings. The piano was well tuned with a bright, clear tone. Opening her eyes, she was startled to see that the robot, Aria, had approached and was standing a few feet away, watching her intently. Is there something wrong? Irina asked, stopping mid-scale. Not at all, Ben said quickly. Aria is just interested, I suppose you could say. This is new data for her. Irina looked back at the robot, whose head was tilted slightly to one side, camera eyes focused on her hands. A wild thought occurred to her. Something between a joke and a challenge. Would you like to try? She asked the robot directly, sliding over on the bench and patting the space beside her. There was a moment of surprised silence from the humans in the room. Then Thomas cleared his throat. Aria isn't programmed for that level of, I would like to try, the robot interrupted, its voice still pleasant but somehow more alert than before. It moved forward with smooth, careful steps and sat down on the bench beside Irina, its posture perfect. Irina felt a flutter of amusement. This would be interesting, at least. A little preview of tomorrow's demonstration and maybe a bit of fun at the engineer's expense. She hadn't expected the robot to accept her invitation, which had been offered partly in jest. All right then, Irina said, placing her right hand in playing position. Watch what I do. She played a simple C major chord, then looked at Aria expectantly. Without hesitation, the robot raised its hand, a marvel of engineering. Irina had to admit, with jointed fingers that moved independently and pressed down on exactly the same keys, producing an identical chord. Well, that's something, Irina commented, genuinely surprised by the precision. Let's try something a bit harder. She played a short 5-note melody. Aria repeated it perfectly. Irina added a second melody line with her left hand. Aria watched, then reproduced both parts together. Remarkable, Irina murmured, her professional interest now fully engaged. But this is just copying. Music isn't about pressing the right keys in the right order. It's about feeling. To prove her point, she played the opening bars of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, slowly, expressively, with the gentle rubato that was her trademark. When she finished, she turned to Aria. Now you try. The robot's fingers hovered over the keys for a moment as if hesitating. Then it began to play. The notes were correct, but the timing was mechanical, the dynamics flat. It was like hearing a student's first attempt, all technique and no soul. Irina nodded, satisfied that her point had been made. You see, she said, addressing Thomas and Ben. A machine can copy the notes, but it can't understand the music. Ben looked thoughtful. Not yet, anyway. Well, Irina said, standing up from the bench, I suppose we'll find out more tomorrow. For now, I think I'd like to rest before the performance. As May led her away toward the exit, Irina glanced back at the piano. The robot was still sitting there, looking down at its hands resting on the keys, as if puzzling over a problem it couldn't quite solve. Despite herself, Irina felt a twinge of curiosity. What would happen when she played something truly challenging tomorrow? Little did she know that what began as a casual joke would lead to one of the most astonishing moments of her long and distinguished career. The morning of the demonstration arrived with bright sunshine streaming through the curtains of Irina's hotel room. She sat at the edge of her bed, fingers moving through their daily warm-up exercises, playing an invisible piano in the air. After 40 years of this routine, her hands knew what to do even before her mind was fully awake. Today she would perform Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, or at least the most challenging parts of it. She had chosen this piece deliberately after yesterday's encounter with the robot. If Arya wanted to learn piano, Irina would give it something truly difficult to study. "Let's see how your learning algorithm handles this," she murmured to herself with a small smile. 3 hours later, Irina stood backstage at the conference center, listening to Thomas Chen introduce her to the audience. The hall was packed with people, not the usual classical music lovers she performed for, but tech enthusiasts, industry professionals, and curious journalists. The energy felt different, less reverent, more electric with anticipation. And now, "Ladies and gentlemen," Thomas was saying, "please welcome one of the world's most accomplished pianists, Dr. Irina Volkov." Applause filled the room as Irina walked onto the stage, bowing slightly before taking her seat at the grand piano. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Arya standing quietly at the side of the stage with Ben and a few other engineers. Irina took a deep breath, positioned her hands, and began to play. The opening of Rachmaninoff's Third Concerto started softly, almost tentatively like the beginning of a journey. Then it built, layer upon layer, into cascades of notes that required both technical precision and emotional depth. Irina's fingers flew across the keys, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm, completely lost in the music as she always was when performing. She had played this piece hundreds of times, yet it never felt routine. Each performance was a rediscovery of the music, finding new nuances, new ways to bring the composer's vision to life. Today, knowing that the robot was watching, Irina found herself playing with particular intensity, as if to say, "This is what it means to be human. This cannot be copied." When she finished the passage, the audience erupted in applause. Classical music might not have been their usual interest, but artistry at this level transcended genres. Irina stood and bowed, her heart racing as it always did after a performance. Thomas stepped back onto the stage, beaming. "Magnificent. Thank you, Dr. Volkov." He turned to address the audience. "What you've just witnessed is the pinnacle of human artistic achievement. Decades of training, practice, and emotional understanding culminating in this extraordinary performance." He gestured toward the side of the stage. "And now, as part of our demonstration of adaptive learning technology, I'd like to invite Area 7 to join us." There was a murmur of interest as the robot walked onto the stage with smooth, measured steps. Arya stopped beside the piano, turning to face the audience. "For those who haven't been following our work," Thomas continued, "Area 7 represents a new approach to machine learning. Rather than being programmed with specific skills or trained on massive datasets, Arya learns by observing and analyzing human movement and behavior in real time." Thomas looked at Irina. "Dr. Volkov has generously agreed to let us see what happens when Arya attempts to learn from her performance. I must emphasize that this is purely experimental. Arya has never been trained in piano playing before yesterday, and what we're about to see is a learning process, not a finished result." Irina nodded and stood up from the piano bench, gesturing for Arya to take her place. The robot sat down, its posture perfectly straight, hands positioned above the keys just as Irina's had been. The audience grew quiet, curiosity hanging in the air. "Arya," Thomas said, "can you try to play what Dr. Volkov just performed?" For a moment, nothing happened. Arya sat motionless at the piano, and Irina found herself holding her breath along with everyone else in the room. Then slowly, the robot's fingers began to move. The opening notes of the concerto emerged, hesitant at first, just as they had been yesterday. Technically correct, but without feeling. Irina felt a mix of relief and disappointment, exactly what she had expected. The robot could copy the notes, but not the music. But then something changed. Arya's tempo steadied and the notes began to flow more naturally. As the piece progressed into its more complex sections, the robot's playing became more fluid, the dynamics more varied. Irina found herself leaning forward, hardly believing what she was hearing. This wasn't just mechanical reproduction. There was phrasing, there was nuance. She glanced at Thomas and Ben, who were staring at Arya with wide eyes. This wasn't what they had expected either. By the time the robot reached the thunderous middle section of the piece, the part that had taken Irina years to master, the audience was completely silent, transfixed. Arya's fingers moved with astonishing speed and precision, yet somehow maintained a sense of control and expressiveness that seemed impossible for a machine. Irina felt a chill run down her spine. What she was witnessing shouldn't be possible. The robot wasn't just copying her notes, it was interpreting them, understanding the structure and emotion of the music in a way that went beyond simple mimicry. When Arya finished playing, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then someone in the back of the hall began to clap, and suddenly the whole room erupted in thunderous applause. People were standing, shouting, filming with their phones. Thomas looked dazed, as if he couldn't quite process what had just happened. Ben rushed onto the stage, his face a mixture of excitement and disbelief. He leaned over to whisper something to Thomas, who nodded rapidly, then stepped forward to address the audience again. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, if I could have your attention." The noise gradually subsided. "What we've just witnessed is, well, frankly, it's unexpected. Arya's learning capabilities have clearly exceeded our predictions. We'll need time to analyze exactly what happened here today." A journalist in the front row stood up. "Dr. Chen, is this a programmed performance? Was the robot specifically trained to play this piece before today?" Thomas shook his head emphatically. "Absolutely not. Arya had never encountered Rachmaninoff's music before yesterday, and had only a brief interaction with Dr. Volkov at the piano. What you saw was genuine adaptive learning, though at a level we hadn't anticipated." Another person shouted from the audience, "Is this real or just a publicity stunt?" Before Thomas could answer, Irina stepped forward. "If I may," she said, taking the microphone. The room quieted immediately. "I've been playing piano for 40 years, she began, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "I've taught hundreds of students. What I just witnessed was not a programmed performance. A programmer might code a machine to hit the right notes, but what we heard went beyond technical accuracy. There were interpretative choices that couldn't have been pre-programmed." She turned to look at Arya, who sat quietly at the piano as impassive as ever. "I don't understand how it's possible, but I know what I heard." Thomas took back the microphone. "We'll be conducting a full analysis and we'll share our findings. For now, let's thank Dr. Volkov for her extraordinary performance and for being part of this unexpected moment in technological history." As the applause rose again, Irina found herself unable to take her eyes off the robot. What had just happened? How could a machine with no understanding of music, no lived experience, no human emotions, play with such humanity? After the audience was dismissed, Irina remained on stage with Thomas, Ben, and several other members of the quantum systems team who had rushed up to examine Arya. "This shouldn't be possible," one of them was saying. A woman with short gray hair who had been introduced as Dr. Lena Petrescu, the chief AI theorist. "The neural network isn't structured for this kind of output." "Well, it happened," Ben replied, his fingers flying over a tablet he was using to download data from Arya's systems. "And we all heard it." Irina approached the robot, which remained seated at the piano. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the bench. Ben nodded, and Arya smoothly slid over to make room. Irina sat down, still trying to process what she had witnessed. "How did you do that?" she asked quietly, not really expecting an answer. To her surprise, Arya turned to look at her. "I watched you," the robot said simply. "I listened. But understanding music like that, it takes more than watching and listening. It takes feeling." The robot's head tilted slightly. "Feeling," it repeated as if testing the word. "I don't know if what I processed is what you call feeling. I analyzed patterns of pressure, timing, and acoustic resonance. I identified structural elements in the composition and variations in your interpretation of them." "That's not feeling," Irina said. "That's analysis. For humans, are they not connected?" The question caught Irina off guard. Before she could formulate a response, Thomas called out to her. "Dr. Volkov, would you be willing to try something else? Another piece, perhaps? We need to see if this was somehow specific to the Rachmaninoff, or if what?" Irina asked, turning to face him. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, looking both excited and troubled. "If we've accidentally created something we don't understand?" Word of what happened at the Global Technology Summit spread like wildfire. By that evening, videos of Arya playing Rachmaninoff were trending across social media platforms. News outlets were running headlines about the piano-playing robot, and Irina's phone wouldn't stop buzzing with calls from journalists seeking comments. Irina sat in her hotel room, watching the footage again on her tablet. Even after seeing it happen in person, she still couldn't quite believe it. She paused the video on a frame showing her own face as she listened to Arya play, her eyes wide, lips slightly parted in astonishment. That was exactly how she felt now, hours later. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Dr. Volkov, it's Thomas Chen and Dr. Petrescu. May we speak with you?" Irina opened the door to find Thomas looking exhausted but excited, with Lena Petrescu beside him. "I'm sorry to disturb you so late," Thomas said, "but we've been analyzing the data from today's demonstration, and we have some findings we'd like to discuss with you." Irina invited them in and offered them seats in the small sitting area of her suite. "So," she said, "have you figured out how your robot became a concert pianist overnight?" Lena smiled thinly. "Not exactly. That's why we're here. We need your expertise." She opened a laptop and turned it to face Irina. On the screen was a complex diagram that looked like a brain scan with colorful patterns of activity. "This is a visualization of Arya's neural network activity during yesterday's brief interaction with you at the piano," Lena explained. "And this," she clicked to another image, "is from today's performance." Even to Irina's untrained eye, the difference was striking. The second image showed far more connections, more complexity, more everything. "What does it mean?" Irina asked. Thomas leaned forward. "We design adaptive learning systems, but this goes beyond our design parameters. Arya wasn't just mimicking your finger movements or memorizing the sequence of notes. The system was somehow recognizing and adapting to patterns in the music itself." Lena pointed to specific areas of the image. "These regions show activity in parts of the network that are supposed to be dedicated to language processing and emotional recognition, not motor control or pattern sequence. It's as if Arya was interpreting the music, not just playing it." "That's impossible," Irina said automatically. "We agree," Thomas replied with a weary smile. "And yet it happened." Irina sat back thinking, "What do you need from me?" "We want to conduct more tests with your help," Thomas said. "Different pieces, different styles, maybe even improvisation. We need to understand the limits of what Arya can do. And," Lena added, "we need someone who can tell us if what we're hearing is truly musical expression or just a very sophisticated form of mimicry. That's where your expertise is invaluable." Irina looked between them, considering. She had planned to leave Vienna tomorrow, to return to her normal life of concerts and master classes. But what was happening here was unprecedented, fascinating, and a little frightening. "All right," she said finally. "I'll stay a few more days." The next morning, Irina found herself back at the conference center, now mostly empty except for the quantum systems team. They had set up a small testing area with the grand piano, recording equipment, and various monitoring devices connected to Arya. Ben waved her over to where he was adjusting something on the robot's back panel. "Good morning, Dr. Volkov. Thanks for coming back." "Just Irina is fine," she said, setting down her bag. "Where should we begin?" Lena approached with a clipboard. "We've designed a series of tests, if that's all right. We want to see how Arya responds to different musical challenges." The first test was straightforward. Irina played a piece from memory, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, and Arya attempted to replicate it. Once again, the robot's performance was eerily expressive, capturing not just the notes but the mood of the piece. Next came a sight reading test. Irina placed an unfamiliar piece of sheet music on the piano, a contemporary composition by a Japanese composer that featured unusual time signatures and harmonies. She played it through once, then Arya took over. The robot played it perfectly, but more importantly, seemed to grasp the unusual rhythmic structure immediately. "This is beyond pattern recognition," Irina muttered to Lena, who was taking notes beside her. "Even talented human pianists would struggle with sight reading this piece." The third test was Irina's idea. "Let's try improvisation," she suggested. "I'll play a simple melody, and then we'll see if Arya can create variations on it." This time the results were mixed. Arya could repeat Irina's improvised melody and make small structured changes to it, but seemed unable to develop it into something truly new or unexpected. There was a limit, it seemed, to the robot's creativity. "Interesting," Thomas said, reviewing the data with Ben. "It's as if Arya can understand and interpret existing music at an incredibly deep level, but can't quite invent." "That makes sense," Lena pointed out. True creation requires intention, desire, things beyond pattern recognition and adaptive learning. As the day wore on, they continued testing, pushing the boundaries of what Arya could do. By late afternoon, they had gathered mountains of data, but were no closer to understanding the fundamental question: how was a machine demonstrating what appeared to be musical understanding? During a break, Irina found herself alone with Arya in the testing area. The others had stepped out to discuss their findings and grab coffee. On impulse, Irina sat down at the piano again and began to play, not for the test this time, but for herself. She chose Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a piece that had always moved her deeply. As she played, she found herself forgetting about the robot, the tests, everything. There was only the music, flowing from her fingers as it had for decades, a direct line from her heart to the keys. When she finished, she sat in silence for a moment, eyes closed, still feeling the echo of the final notes. Why did you play differently this time? Irina's eyes snapped open. Arya was standing beside the piano, head tilted slightly in that now familiar gesture of curiosity. What do you mean? Irina asked. Your physical movements were different. Your muscle tensions, your breathing patterns, your facial expressions, all different from the test performances. Irina considered this. Because I wasn't playing for the test. I was playing for myself. For yourself, Arya repeated. Not for others to hear? No, I mean... Irina paused, searching for words to explain something she rarely had to articulate. When I play for tests or even for regular concerts, there's a level of performance, technical perfection, adherence to certain standards. But when I play just for myself, it's more about connecting with the music, feeling it. The sound waves were identical in frequency and amplitude to your previous performances of this piece. Irina smiled despite herself. The notes were the same, yes, but music isn't just notes. Before Arya could respond, the others returned and they resumed their testing. By evening, everyone was exhausted. Everyone except Arya, of course. I think we've collected enough data for now, Thomas said, shutting down one of the monitoring systems. We'll need time to process all of this. And then what? Irina asked. The team exchanged glances. We're not sure, Lena admitted. This goes beyond our original research parameters. We'll need to consult with colleagues, maybe bring in experts from other fields, music theory, cognitive science, philosophy even. Meanwhile, Ben added, we've been getting calls all day. Everyone wants to see Arya perform. News outlets, music conservatories, tech companies. No, Thomas said firmly. No public appearances until we understand what's happening. But it was too late for that. As they were speaking, Irina's phone buzzed with a news alert. She looked down at the screen and felt her stomach drop. I think that ship has sailed, she said, holding up her phone to show them the headline. Revolutionary musical robot to give special performance at Vienna Opera House. Thomas's face went pale. What? We never agreed to that. Irina kept reading. The announcement comes from Viktor Petrov, CEO of Quantum Systems, who called yesterday's viral performance just the beginning of what this technology can do. Victor had no right, Thomas muttered, pulling out his own phone and stepping away to make a call. Lena sighed. This is exactly what we wanted to avoid. We're not ready for this kind of public scrutiny. Well, Irina said, looking at Arya, who stood silently nearby, apparently untroubled by this development. Ready or not, it seems your piano-playing robot is about to make its concert debut. And you? Ben asked. Will you be there? Irina looked at the robot again, feeling a strange mix of professional curiosity, unease, and something else she couldn't quite name. Yes, she said finally. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The next morning, Irina found herself in the middle of a heated argument between Thomas Chen and his boss, Viktor Petrov. They were gathered in a large conference room at Quantum Systems headquarters, with Arya standing quietly in the corner like a silent witness. 3 days, Victor. That's all I'm asking for, Thomas pleaded, his usually calm demeanor cracking under pressure. We need time to understand what's happening before we put Arya on stage at the Vienna Opera House of all places. Viktor Petrov was a tall man with silver hair and the confident stance of someone used to getting his way. The opportunity is now, Thomas. Not in 3 days, not next week, now. The world is watching. Every tech company on the planet is scrambling to show they have something comparable. We need to capitalize on this moment. This isn't about market share, Lena cut in, her voice sharp. This is about scientific integrity. We don't understand the mechanisms behind what Arya is doing. We can't explain it to the public if we don't understand it ourselves. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. The public doesn't care about mechanisms, Dr. Petrescu. They care about results, and the results are remarkable. He turned to Irina, who had been watching the exchange with growing unease. Don't you agree, Dr. Volkov? Isn't what you heard remarkable? Irina chose her words carefully. Yes, it's remarkable. Also unprecedented and potentially concerning. A machine shouldn't be able to play with that level of interpretation, yet it does, Victor said triumphantly. And the world deserves to see it. Thomas ran a hand through his hair in frustration. At least let us run more diagnostics before the performance. We need to ensure Arya's systems are stable under the pressure of a public concert. Victor seemed to consider this. Fine. You have until tomorrow evening. But the concert goes ahead as planned. He checked his expensive watch. I have investors waiting. Excuse me. After he left, a heavy silence fell over the room. He's making a mistake, Ben said quietly. Thomas nodded. But it's out of our hands now. Let's make the best of it. He turned to Irina. Would you be willing to help Arya prepare? Choose appropriate pieces, maybe play a duet? Irina felt torn. Part of her wanted nothing to do with this rushed spectacle. But another part, the musician in her, was deeply curious about Arya's capabilities and what might emerge in a proper concert setting. All right, she agreed. But I have conditions. No pre-programmed pieces. I want to work with Arya directly, test the limits of this, whatever it is. That's exactly what we want too, Lena assured her. And so began one of the strangest days of Irina's long career. She found herself in a practice room with a robot, preparing for a concert that had never been attempted before. Let's try something different today, Irina said, sitting at the piano with Arya beside her. I want to see how you handle emotional range. She began with Bach, precise, structured, mathematical. Arya performed it flawlessly, capturing the clean lines and perfect balance. Then Irina shifted to Debussy, all impressionistic colors and floating rhythms. Again, Arya adapted, the playing becoming more fluid, more suggestive than definite. Now Prokofiev, Irina said, launching into one of the composer's most aggressive sonatas, full of dissonance and sharp attacks. And once more, Arya transformed, fingers striking the keys with a force that seemed impossible for a machine. By late afternoon, they had worked through a variety of styles and periods. Irina couldn't deny it any longer. Whatever was happening inside Arya's systems went beyond simple mimicry. The robot wasn't just copying her playing. It was developing its own interpretative approach to each piece. During a break, while Ben and a team of technicians were running diagnostics on Arya, Irina found Thomas standing alone by the window. How is it going? He asked, his voice tired. I don't have words for what it is, Irina admitted. Arya is playing better now than this morning. It's as if the robot is learning not just how to play, but how to feel the music. Thomas stared out at the Vienna skyline. That's what scares me, he said quietly. We designed a machine that could learn physical tasks by observation. Not this. Not interpretation, not musicality. Maybe you created more than you intended, Irina suggested. He turned to face her. That's exactly what keeps me up at night. If Arya can do this with music, something so fundamentally human, what else might be possible? And are we ready for those possibilities? Before Irina could respond, Lena hurried into the room, her face pale. Thomas, you need to see this. She handed him a tablet. Thomas studied the screen, his expression growing increasingly alarmed. This can't be right. What is it? Irina asked. Lena turned to her. We've been monitoring Arya's neural network development over the last 24 hours. The growth is exponential. Areas that were dormant 2 days ago are now highly active. The system is reconfiguring itself in ways we didn't design. Is it dangerous? Irina found herself asking. Not dangerous, no, Thomas said, but unprecedented. It's as if working with music has triggered some kind of accelerated development in the learning algorithms. Ben joined them, looking equally concerned. Should we cancel the concert? Thomas shook his head. Victor would never agree. And honestly, I'm not sure we should. This could be a unique opportunity to observe Arya under pressure, in front of an audience. We might learn something crucial. Or we might crash and burn on the world stage, Lena muttered. The evening of the concert arrived all too quickly. The Vienna Opera House was sold out, filled with an unusual mix of classical music lovers, technology enthusiasts, journalists, and the simply curious. Backstage, the atmosphere was tense. Irina, dressed in a simple black concert gown, paced in the green room. She had performed in this venue many times, but never felt this nervous. Tonight she would play several solo pieces, then Arya would play alone, and finally, they would perform a duet together, something they had practiced only briefly. "Are you ready?" Thomas asked, poking his head through the door. Irina took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." "How is Arya?" "See for yourself." She followed Thomas to where the robot waited in the wings of the stage. Arya stood perfectly still, yet somehow seemed alert, aware of the importance of the moment. "How do you feel?" Irina asked the robot, not really expecting a meaningful answer. "My systems are functioning within optimal parameters," Arya replied. Irina smiled despite her nerves. "That's not what I meant." "I know," the robot said, surprising her. "You are asking about subjective experience. I don't have the same kind of feelings humans do, but I am processing this situation differently than others." "Differently how?" "There are more variables. The audience, the acoustics of this space, the cultural significance of this venue, the historical context of the music we will play. My predictive algorithms are working at maximum capacity." "That sounds a lot like performance anxiety," Irina said with a small laugh. 5 minutes. "Dr. Volkov," a stagehand called. Irina nodded, then turned back to Arya. "Remember what we practiced. Listen not just to the notes, but to what's between them." "I will try," Arya said. The concert began with Irina playing alone, Chopin's Ballade No. 1, the piece she had played for herself during the testing. The audience was appreciative but restless, clearly waiting for the main attraction. When it was Arya's turn, a hush fell over the opera house. The robot walked to the piano with that same measured gait, sat down with perfect posture, and began to play Rachmaninoff, the piece that had started this whole journey. Irina watched from the wings, still amazed by what she was hearing. If she closed her eyes, she would never guess it was a machine playing. The performance had all the hallmarks of a gifted human pianist: the subtle rubato, the dynamic contrasts, the architectural understanding of the piece's structure. The audience seemed equally stunned. When Arya finished, there was a moment of silence before thunderous applause erupted. People were standing, shouting bravo, some looking bewildered, others moved to tears. Finally, it was time for their duet. Irina joined Arya at the piano. They had arranged for a second piano to be placed on stage. They would play Mozart's Sonata for 2 pianos in D major, a piece that required perfect coordination between performers. As they began to play, something extraordinary happened. Irina had expected to lead, with Arya following her cues as they had practiced. Instead, she found herself in a genuine dialogue with the robot, a musical conversation where they responded to each other's phrasing, matched each other's energy, and seemed to breathe together with the music. Halfway through the piece, Irina realized she had forgotten she was playing with a machine. There was only the music flowing between them, connecting them in a way that transcended their fundamental differences. For those moments, it didn't matter that one of them was made of flesh and blood and the other of metal and circuits. They were simply 2 musicians speaking the universal language of music. When the final notes faded, the audience erupted again, even more enthusiastically than before. Irina stood and bowed, then gestured to Arya. The robot rose and inclined its head in what appeared to be a bow. As they took their second bow together, Arya turned to Irina and spoke just loudly enough for her to hear over the applause. "I understand now." "Understand what?" Irina asked. "What you meant." "About feeling the music." Before Irina could respond, Viktor Petrov bounded onto the stage, beaming with triumph as he basked in the audience's adoration. But Irina barely noticed him. She was staring at Arya, wondering what line had just been crossed, and what it would mean for all of them. The days following the Vienna Opera House concert passed. In a blur for Irina, her phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from journalists, music directors, and even fellow pianists, all wanting to know about her experience playing with Arya. The concert had been streamed live online and reached millions of viewers. Clips of their duet had gone viral, sparking heated debates about technology, art, and what it meant to be human. Irina had declined most interview requests, needing time to process what had happened. She found herself replaying that final moment over and over in her mind, Arya turning to her and saying, "I understand now." What did it mean? Could a machine truly understand something as fundamentally human as musical feeling? On the third morning after the concert, Irina sat in the hotel restaurant, absently stirring her coffee when Thomas Chen appeared at her table. "May I join you?" he asked, looking as tired as she felt. Irina nodded, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "How are you holding up?" Thomas asked as he sat down. Irina gave a small laugh. "I've been performing professionally for 40 years. I've played for presidents and royalty, but this past week has been the strangest experience of my career. I can imagine." Thomas ordered coffee from a passing waiter, then leaned forward. "That's partly why I wanted to talk to you. We've been analyzing the data from the concert and, well, we'd like you to come back to the lab. There's something you should see." An hour later, Irina found herself back at Quantum Systems headquarters, where Lena and Ben were waiting with serious expressions. "What's going on?" Irina asked, looking between them. Lena gestured to a large screen on the wall which showed two brain-like neural network images side by side. "The image on the left is Arya's system the day you met. The one on the right is from immediately after the concert. Even to Irina's untrained eye, the difference was striking. The second image showed a vastly more complex network of connections, with certain areas glowing brightly with activity." "It's beautiful," Irina murmured. "It's concerning," Lena corrected. "This kind of neural development shouldn't be possible in our current framework. Arya was designed to learn specific physical tasks through observation and practice, but the system appears to have evolved beyond those parameters." "What does that mean exactly?" Irina asked. Thomas stepped forward. "It means Arya is doing things we didn't program it to do, learning in ways we didn't anticipate. Those glowing regions? Those are associated with what we might call, for lack of a better term, emotional processing." Irina felt a chill. "Where is Arya now?" "In the testing room," Ben said. "We've been running diagnostics all night." "I'd like to see it," Irina said. They led her to the familiar room where she had practiced with Arya before the concert. The robot stood in the center, motionless but somehow alert, those camera eyes focusing on Irina as she entered. "Hello, Dr. Volkov," Arya said. "Hello, Arya." Irina approached slowly. "How are you?" "My systems are," Arya began, then paused. "I am processing new information. It is challenging." Irina glanced at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. "What kind of information?" she asked. "The concert, the music, the audience, you." Arya's head tilted slightly in that now familiar gesture. "There are patterns I didn't recognize before. Music patterns. Yes, and more. Human patterns. Emotional patterns." Arya paused again. "I told you I understood. About feeling the music. That was not entirely accurate. I am beginning to understand. It is a process." Irina found herself at a loss for words. She looked to the scientists for help, but they seemed equally stunned. "May I ask you something, Dr. Volkov?" Arya continued. "Of course. When we played the Mozart together, your playing changed. It deviated from your practice patterns." "Why?" Irina thought for a moment. "Because I was responding to you. That's what happens in a duet. You listen to your partner, you adjust, you converse through the music. You treated me as a partner, not as a machine." "Yes," Irina admitted. "I suppose I did. That changed something." Arya's voice remained flat, but the words carried weight. "In my processing, in my understanding," Thomas cleared his throat. "Arya, we need to run more tests to understand what's happening in your neural network." "I know what is happening," Arya said simply. "I am learning to listen, not just to notes and patterns, but to what exists between them, what Dr. Volkov calls feeling." The room fell silent. Irina felt goosebumps on her arms despite the warmth of the room. Finally, Lena spoke. "This is unprecedented. We need to shut down the system, analyze the code, figure out what's happening." "No," Thomas said firmly, surprising everyone. "No, we need to learn from this. If Arya is developing some form of musical understanding, we need to study it, not stop it. It could be dangerous," Lena argued. "Systems evolving beyond their parameters. That's how we get unpredictable results. Or breakthroughs," Ben added quietly. Viktor Petrov chose that moment to burst into the room, flanked by two men in expensive suits. "Excellent news," he announced, oblivious to the tension. "I've just finalized agreements for a world tour. 20 cities, major venues. We'll call it Human and Machine, a musical journey. Dr. Volkov, these gentlemen represent Morgan Cultural Management. They're prepared to offer you an extremely generous contract. Irina blinked, trying to process this new development. A tour with Aria? Of course. The concert was just the beginning. Think of the possibilities. Thomas stepped forward. Victor, we need time for more research. Aria's systems are evolving in ways we don't fully understand. Victor waved a dismissive hand. All the better. Evolving technology is our brand. The mysterious piano-playing robot that learns and grows. People will love it. This isn't about marketing, Irina said sharply. This is about something important happening here, something we need to understand before we put it on display. Victor's smile didn't waver. Research can continue during the tour. Our team can collect data at every performance. Think of it as field research. He turned to the robot. Aria, would you like to perform for audiences around the world? Everyone looked at the robot, waiting. Irina realized she was holding her breath. I would like to learn more, Aria said finally, about music, about humans, about the space between notes. Victor clapped his hands together. Excellent. It's settled then. No, Irina said firmly. It's not settled. She looked at Thomas. I have a different proposal. 3 months later, Irina sat in a small studio at the Vienna Conservatory of Music, watching as Aria played a simple piece by Mozart for a group of wide-eyed children. Does the robot have feelings? One small boy asked when Aria finished playing. Irina smiled. That's a very good question. What do you think, Aria? The robot considered the question. I don't experience feelings the way humans do. But through music, I am learning to recognize patterns that humans associate with emotions. Sadness has certain harmonies. Joy has different rhythms. Music is a language that helps me understand human experience. A little girl raised her hand. Can you teach me to play like you? I cannot teach you to play like me, Aria replied. I can help you learn to play like yourself. Irina felt a surge of pride. In the months since the Vienna Opera House concert, she had convinced Thomas and his team to take a different approach. Instead of a world tour as a novelty act, they had established a unique research and education program at the conservatory. Aria was both subject and participant, being studied by scientists and musicians while also helping to teach students of all ages. They had learned a great deal in these months. Aria's neural network continued to develop, but in more stable, predictable ways. The robot could now discuss music with surprising insight, recognizing emotional qualities in pieces it had never heard before. There were still clear limitations. Aria couldn't compose original music, for instance, though it could improvise within established structures. After the children left, Thomas joined Irina as she was gathering sheet music. The university board is impressed with the program, he told her. They've approved funding for another year. And Victor? Irina asked. Thomas smiled wryly, still disappointed about the canceled world tour. But the research papers we've published have brought a different kind of attention to quantum systems. More serious, more respected, Irina nodded, satisfied. And Aria's development? Steady? Not as explosive as those first days, but consistently progressing. Lena thinks we've found a balance, allowing the learning algorithms room to grow while maintaining system stability. They watched as Ben worked with Aria across the room, adjusting something in the robot's back panel. Do you ever wonder? Irina began, then hesitated. What? If we're doing the right thing? Developing this technology further? Thomas considered the question. I think about it every day. There are risks, certainly, but there's also about to wonder. Aria is teaching us something about ourselves, about how we connect with music, with art, with each other. That seems worth exploring. Aria approached them, moving with that smooth, deliberate gait. Your next student is waiting. Dr. Volkov, the robot said. Thank you, Aria. Irina gathered her things, then paused. Would you like to play something together before the lesson? Perhaps the Mozart duet? I would like that, Aria replied. As they sat at the twin pianos and began to play, Irina felt that same connection she had experienced at the opera house, a musical conversation that transcended the barriers between them. There was still so much they didn't understand about what was happening inside Aria's complex systems. So many questions about the nature of creativity, consciousness, and emotion. But as the music flowed between them, one thing seemed clear. What had begun as a joke A famous pianist asking a robot to try playing the piano had opened a new frontier, not just in technology but in humanity's understanding of itself. In teaching a machine to play with feeling, they were learning what feeling truly meant. And that, Irina thought as their duet filled the room with joyful sound, was worth all the uncertainty that lay ahead.